Here we go. All right, so good afternoon. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Mind Body Balance Coffee Conversation. I am so pleased to be welcoming Mr. Allan Kehler.
Oh.
Yes, to this afternoon's conversation about mindset, mental wellness, and everything related to surviving and navigating these days of quarantine. Okay, so I'm going to just hand it over to you pretty quickly here, Allan. I have such high regard for the work that you do and mostly the transparency that you share. So open and honest and vulnerable, and that just speaks volumes to your character and your passion behind wanting to help others. So I asked you to chat about with me today. Let's talk about how COVID is affecting the men in our households and our homes as fathers and husbands. Like, what are you hearing with the men that you are chatting with?
Yes. Okay. Thanks for the intro. That was quite the intro, by the way. I appreciate that. So what I'm hearing from a lot of the men, there's two fundamental things that are happening. Because as men, we have this need to always do things, to go, to be busy, to be providers. And the second one is to fix. So that first one, for example, we live in this world that is incredibly busy, right? Even the go-to word used to be, if you ask people, how are you doing? Oh, busy. So much to do. What has happened with COVID-19 is all of a sudden, all of those things that used to occupy our time and our headspace, a lot of that has shifted or is no longer there. So all of a sudden, we are stuck in the confines of four walls. We are with our family 24/7, which for some, that's a blessing. And for others, that's I don't know if curse is the right word, but it's challenging. And so all of a sudden, what's happening is all these men and women too, but all of a sudden we're stuck with self. And I never had a relationship with myself. I always tried to do things so that I could live outside of myself. And so for a lot of people, all of a sudden they're having to be with their feelings, their thoughts, and that in itself causes so much discomfort, anxiety, depression. Then when they don't have the tools to manage that, a lot of men are manifesting that emotion into anger or sometimes aggression, and then there's outbursts in the home. And this other piece is around the fixing. A lot of men who are calling, they're saying they're seeing these struggles in their relationships. They're seeing financial strain, and they just want it to go away. And even it's little things like the one man who called me a couple days ago, he said, even when I go to the grocery store to pick up groceries and I'm sitting in my car and somebody is bringing the groceries to me, he said, that is an attack on my manhood. He said, I am more than capable and able to get the groceries myself. This makes me feel like an elderly person when somebody has to do a service for me. I can do it. Let me do it. So there's this battle between almost pride and all these old scripts that are surfacing.
Yeah, totally. Those old scripts between that teeter-totter belief systems between strength and weakness, I think, right? So
Yeah.
I'm weak if I have to have somebody bring my groceries to me, right?
Yeah. Now, I guess on the flip side, or what I've seen is this progression. And I think most people have evolved through all this change because change is difficult. So I hear from a lot of people that the first 2 weeks, myself included, because I really struggled, but now people are starting to find their groove or a new normal, adapting to new routines. And one of the neat things that I've actually heard from a lot of fathers is that they have learned to appreciate the time that they've been able to have with their children. The one man, for example, said he would come home, his daughter would show him a drawing and say, look what I did, Dad. And oh yeah, beautiful, great. Now, he said he actually takes the time to sit with her to have that connection. And he said she even got injured recently, and he found that he was emotionally connected to her in a way that he wasn't before because he's been able to bond.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah, it is. It's awesome. But we have to make the time. And I guess that's the thing. We all have equal amounts of time, but we have decisions in how we want to utilize that.
So that's really interesting that you've been hearing from men, open up and say, listen, before this, when I had to manage work and finances and being a father and a husband, everything. I didn't have time to be emotionally present with my children or maybe my spouse. So
Yeah.
that is that kind of what you're hearing?
Yeah, didn't take the time. The time was there, but I think that myself too, I can get so caught up in my work and in the world around me that unfortunately I can actually neglect the things that I value the most.
Yeah, and I'm curious if it's, because you were right when you said we all have the same amount of time in a given day. When you feel less mentally and emotionally exhausted from a full day of work and feeling overwhelmed, and then coming home, and then your daughter says, "Hey, look at what I drew." You're not so mentally and emotionally exhausted that you actually have the energy and capacity to tune in at an emotional level to that, which is interesting, I think.
Yeah, and it's also, I guess I find it really interesting how sometimes in our place of work, I mean, away from home, that we can be so patient, we can be so kind, we can always smile. But then when we come into our own house, sometimes then we take off that mask and we have depleted all of our energy and patience out there. And then we come home with a very different energy when really the people around us in our homes are the ones who are most deserving and worthy of the best version of us. So I think that what's happened is there's more consistency for the people who are staying home where they're I don't know if being true to themselves is the right language to use, but it's just different, but it can be a positive different.
Yeah, I've often had clients come to me and say, I feel like my spouse saves the best of themselves for everybody else and then unleashes with us. And there's those conversations about, that safe haven and those people that love you, you allow yourself to be vulnerable and take off that false mask that sometimes we're just playing the role because we feel like we have to fit in or we have to meet a certain set of expectations. And I feel like men for sure feel that pressure a little more than women. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, I mean that's fair. At the end of the day, what I try to remember is that emotions are energy. And I think what happens is we just suppress all the frustrations from the day and then we get home and we just, blah, we release. But there has to be an acknowledgement of when we're doing that. And what I find is that often the partners are silent. They just tolerate the behaviors. And that's not healthy either.
Right.
It's important to be assertive in the way that the partner communicates and doesn't have to tolerate any kind of bullshit or negative energy. And so the challenge with that is that often, again, not to generalize, but men then usually meet that energy with irritability or anger, and then you're just adding fuel to the fire. So this is where a partnership and communication is really key in order to have a healthy relationship.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So when we were chatting before, you had mentioned about the interesting dynamic of men and women both having to balance work from home and
Right, right.
what's happening to the energy dynamics within the home. So do you want to chat about that a bit? I think that was really interesting.
Yeah. So yesterday, some of the clients that I was speaking to were just saying it's really challenging to work from home because work essentially never stops. So we talked about the need to have structure and routine so that at 5 o'clock that laptop closes and you do not touch it again. Some of them were saying that the biggest challenge is that their working space is now in the living room or it's even in their bedroom. And then what happens is even if you do close the laptop actually acts as this beacon that represents work. And so if they even walk into the room to try to relax, calm down, unwind, it's really difficult because if the mind or the eyes even connect with the piece of technology, it's boom, all systems go, and then the mind starts spinning. So one of the things that we talked about was just getting a sheet, covering it, a curtain, a divider, doing something to make sure that you can really leave work over here and then home here, and to also just get outside and to connect in those healthy ways that are separate from work.
Yeah, one I find with our family is once we get outside, there really is no concept of time. You can spend 3 hours out there and you don't take your digital devices out there with you and you actually get to be mindfully present.
Yeah, and I'm starting to sleep. I mean, I don't usually sleep, and I've been going outside a lot the last 4 days, and so grateful to have this weather. But for myself and so many other people, just the weather. And for those of us in the prairies who hibernate for so long, and I mean, I've seen my neighbor 3 days in a row, which is just weird. Great guy, but it's great to get some fresh air.
Yeah, that's a parent hack. You take your kids out for a couple hours so that they just like boom, hit the side.
Yeah, off you go.
It's interesting that you mentioned having trouble sleeping, because a lot of my clients, we work through sleep. Sleep is one of the biggest issues when they come in for a body talk session.
Okay.
And you also talked about the senses. I mean, where our senses will tune in if we know something is there, or if we are on a heightened sense alert, we can't actually stop the program from running, right? And I know one of the things for me, and my husband reminds me of, is having the screens right there, after supper, right up until bedtime. And what it actually does, and I know this, I mean, I teach this, but it's like parent yourself, Laura, is
Yeah.
that anytime we have that light that's just right here, it triggers, an actual physiological response with our pineal gland to not make melatonin. Therefore, we're not sleeping. And I think a lot of people don't understand the science behind that. And even those of us that do, like me, forget that it's so important, because I do think sleep has been something for sure that a lot of men and women have shared with me. That's been a challenge. So share with us, what are you doing to maintain wellness within your family? What are you and your wife doing, your children? What does a wellness routine look like for you guys?
Well, I think we really respect each other's space, and that's been key. Tanya is homeschooling the kids, so there hasn't been a big adjustment with that. But there's just an understanding of what we need. There's open communication, which has been huge. There's structure and routine in place. When I'm done work, it's going outside, it's engaging with the family. Tanya is really good at helping me to put away work, because I have a passion for what I do, which is great, but it's not always healthy. And so she really always reminds me to put work away, be present with the family, to play. Kids teach me how to play. And we have 4 dogs, so it's kind of a gong show, but it's also a reason to get out and go for a walk. And I think also for my wellness, it's been consciously making time for me. So I've started to read. I mean, I bet I read 2 books in a span of 4 years. And now I'm on my 3rd book in like 2 months. So that's, and I'm starting to have baths with Epsom salt still. I didn't know that would continue, but I've been doing that, adding some essential oils. And that's where this whole perception of, oh, that's not very manly to have a bath. And hey, I might even use some candles sometimes. Maybe they're even scented. But we got to just get rid of all of this macho manly. If it allows you to feel calm and have an element of peace, then just do it. And maybe don't even just do it. Maybe talk about doing it so that you can give other people permission to try some of those things. And the reality is, what works for me for my wellness won't work for other people, but just be open to trying anything. And you might be really surprised at what works for you. Like even your service, Laura, with Body Talk. That is a wonderful service that has so many benefits, but there are these fears or maybe a misunderstanding of what it is, so people don't act on it. But if you just give it a try, you might be baffled at the results.
Yeah, I always say you have nothing to lose, right? It never does any harm to try something new for self-care. I love what you said about giving yourself permission to try new things, though, because we joke about the whole bath thing in our house too. And my husband's name is Allan, and he loves to read and he loves to take baths. But there's that subconscious programming of it's not manly to take baths with Epsom salts. And I'm an aromatherapist, so he uses essential oil.
Oh.
I'm sure he'll be watching this saying, "Oh my gosh, Laura, thanks for telling the whole entire." Now he knows there's another Allan in the world that does the same thing, and who gives a shit?
We are not alone.
You're not alone. Yeah.
I feel freer already.
Yes, and I love about that about the work that you do is that you said you remained in silence for way too long. So talk a little bit about that. What does that mean to you?
I mean, the short and sweet is silence has never been the answer for any kind of wellness. I alluded to that before. Emotions are energy. The problem is that I would suppress all of the fears and anxiety, and I always feared that if I ever shared what was up here, I'd be met with judgment.
Mm.
And I guess for me, what I also found so cool about that book on men and mental health was that all of us men, we have all these similar fears about what's going on up here in our thoughts, and we don't want it to get out to the world because we'll maybe be perceived as weak, or maybe it'll impact our performance in work or our relationships. And it never happened. And we talked about this last time, Laura, that we are our biggest barriers. And that as soon as I was able to put a voice to some of my challenges, just that freeing of space was liberating. And then to be received with compassion was liberating. And then to see that it's not just me, but when I start to share my struggles, other people are saying those two huge words, the me too. And there's this connection and understanding. All of a sudden, we're starting to move the right way.
Yeah, and then we're also allowing the next generation to do the same.
Absolutely, because they are always, always watching us.
Yeah, and that's something I'm, always been super passionate about as a teacher and a mom of 4, and I'm really starting to realize the more than ever the importance of modeling healthy mental and emotional wellness.
Well, and so that's key too, because what's happening in the last 5 weeks is there's been all this change of energy. Kids are so susceptible to energy. And so as adults, if we're feeling anxiety and irritability and anger, who's going to soak all that up with a sponge? And it's not just about us anymore. If we are parents, it's about ensuring that we take care of ourselves so that we can take care of everyone else. If we can't be healthy, then nobody around us is going to be healthy.
No, and most often as parents, we want to fix things or do things for our children, but the
Yeah.
most powerful thing is to give them the tools to do it themselves.
Yep.
So
That's well said.
yeah, so that's where a lot of my work lately with developing content for children and when I go and speak in schools is because I was just listening actually this morning to a podcast done by a psychologist that said two-thirds of youth don't feel like they have a safe adult at home to speak to or talk to.
Hmm.
So if two-thirds don't even feel like they have a safe adult to talk to, right? How are they going to feel about the behavior or the coping mechanisms that are modeled? So and it goes back to that biblical verse, I think, that give someone a fish, you feed them for a day, give them a fishing rod, right? You feed them for life. And I think it's the same thing with the men and women is instead of trying to solve their problems, we want to give them tools. Right.
Yeah, totally.
And I'd love for you to share a little bit about, speaking of tools, the books that you've written, because those are tools. I really feel like they're very powerful, impactful wellness tools, because reading someone's story and being able to connect with it just gives you the first tool, which is the permission to heal.
Yeah. I guess information is power. And I've always felt that the books were bigger than me. Sometimes I just feel as though, I don't know, I'm a channel for something bigger. And I can't even really take credit for a lot of the things that come out of my mouth or the things that I write. And I just feel incredible gratitude to have been able to have a few ideas, to put it on pen and paper and get a message out there. And I think that what I always find so baffling is people are almost shocked, right? Or you wrote a book like that. Writing a book is so simple to do. If you can speak, you can make a book. You can record something audibly and take that recording and type it. And I think we overthink all this. And we have all this technology around us right now on social media, where if you have a message that you're passionate about, then get it out there. You can make a blog if you enjoy writing. And if you take enough blogs and put them in a linear fashion, what do you have? You have a book. Or you can just shoot even 20 seconds of what you're thinking, and uplifting, and everything can spread really quickly.
Yeah, and that use of the creative mind immediately takes us out of fight or flight and puts us into more of a parasympathetic state. Interesting. Did you know, I read this the other day, that this comes from a Harvard study like 17 years ago. You'll be interested in this.
Uh-huh.
Mental wellness, that the average adult, and this was 17 years ago, has 15 to 20 cortisol spikes a day. which means 15 to 20 times their nervous system is being hijacked by their brain, and they're going to sympathetic response with spiked cortisol levels. That's a lot.
I would say that amidst this COVID-19, we're probably in the hundreds.
I know, it's spiking more so, which is why I feel this is, the best time for people to jump in. Yet I am really finding, and I understand and I'm fully aware, but I'm finding that there's still a lot of resistance, and therein lies the stigma of mental wellness and mental health, right? Is it still not on the top of our priority list? And when we feel like we don't have the time or we're too overwhelmed, we usually put this to the bottom, and we have to change our lens on that, or nothing is going to change. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, I just find it interesting how if you compare the way that we respond to a physical injury versus an emotional, it's often very different, and yet it should not be different. When we're injured at a physical level, we have this immediate we act, right? And emotionally, we can do a real good job of suppressing. And then actually another thing that I'm hearing from a lot of men is the increase in alcohol consumption. And that also starts to become problematic because it's also in line with the manly behaviors. It's seen as socially acceptable to drink. And even, well, for someone in recovery, I think I did a short video this last week, but I just find it really interesting how support groups like AA are not available, yet liquor stores are open. And the CCSA came out with a study that showed how Canadians are self-reporting a significant increase in their alcohol use. And when you look at all the studies around domestic violence or suicide, there's often a strong correlation with alcohol. But like everything, it starts with acknowledgement. And if that's the tool that you're going to, then recognize that maybe that's not a healthy one. And as we said before, be open to new tools.
Yeah. And as you shared in one of your posts lately, you never grew up wanting to be an addict, and nobody
Yeah.
does, right?
Yeah, I did not put in my grade 12 yearbook, yes, one day I want to become an addict. I didn't go teacher, addict, I choose addict.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, I mean, there has to be an acknowledgement and an ownership that initially we choose the line, the joint, the bottle, the pill, whatever it is. But the reality with addiction is as we progress through that part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which we need to make good decisions, kind of goes offline. And that is where choice kind of gets taken away.
Yeah, and I think that people don't understand that that's actually, it's a brain thing. You're in a acute state of stress. You're looking for the easiest thing to decompress that stress, and some of us are led to those very poor coping mechanisms that then lead to addiction.
Yeah, and to break everything down, not to get into a whole heavy topic about addictions, but at the root of everything is pain.
Yeah.
It's pain. People are in pain. They don't have the tools to manage the pain. So then we grab at everything because it's absolutely natural and it makes good sense. It's logical to want to leave pain behind in exchange for pleasure. The problem is that over time, tolerance builds, and all of a sudden we are taken hostage by a substance or behavior.
Yeah, and we can feel that with substances. I mean, I feel that with sugar and caffeine.
Yeah.
Right now during COVID, it's
Yeah.
those are my vices. Those are my go-to. So as we wrap this up, I just would love to invite you to just leave the viewers with a couple of takeaways, like a inspiration, a quote,
Oh boy, I better be really good now.
an,
Gonna close big.
an Allan Kellerism, something
Yeah.
to draw.
I'm going to keep this really simple. I still think that the most powerful tool that we've ever been given is our voice. And I guess the one takeaway is that if you are finding that you're struggling or you're getting overwhelmed or anxious, then I would simply empower you to put a voice to your pain and communicate what you need, whether that is in your house, whether that's with your partner, whether you need more space, but to actually assertively communicate that. If you're struggling, then to actively reach out for help, because there's still so many support groups that are available, or supports in general, resources online, but you have to act on them. And in other words, if you want something different, you have to do something different.
Mike, There you go. I love it. That should, if that's not already in one of your books. I mean, all right. Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure that we'll chat again soon. I always enjoy the time. Very insightful. I always walk away with some new perspective as well. So thanks so much.
Cool. Thank you, Laura. Take care.